This is continuing coverage of United States versus Sean Diddy Combs from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.
Day 2 in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, and we are about to get into it. It was a big day in court, and she was 8.5 months pregnant, sworn in, sitting upright on the witness stand, and allegedly, before she even said a word, the courtroom knew this wasn't going to be just another testimony. The defense knew it too. They asked that she be seated before the jury walked in, quietly hoping that the sight of a very pregnant Cassie Ventura might not linger too long in 12 people's minds. You know, don't want to make her look like you want to give her any sort of sympathy. She's 8.5 months pregnant, but she feels so strongly about the depravity of Sean Combs that she's willing to go into that courtroom and let the world know all about it. Deep, dark secrets in her life that she's kept private. But now, for the sake of others, she's letting it all out. Be sure to press subscribe wherever you're watching this, whether it is on X, Twitter, YouTube, or if you're listening to our podcast, wherever it may be, hit that subscribe button and let me know what you think of the case and what's going on in the testimony in the comment section on YouTube or on Twitter, X, and love to see it. We can continue the conversation on long after we watch this video. So here we go. Cassie Ventura in court, pregnant. That image doesn't wash out of people's minds. What it did, of course, that image throughout the day as we learned more and more about what happened between Cassie and Diddy. Cassie Ventura, recording artist, former protege, and longtime girlfriend of Sean Diddy Combs, was the prosecution's star witness. And what she laid out wasn't just a story of bad decisions or even a toxic relationship. According to prosecutors, it was a systematic, controlled, and deliberately orchestrated network of abuse that ran for years. Her account wasn't framed like some hazy recollection of youthful mistakes. It was structured, precise, and ugly. She said that starting in her early 20s, Diddy began coercing her into what he allegedly called freak-offs. That's the phrase. It sounds cartoonish or unserious. Just wait. These were highly organized, multi-day sex sessions with male escorts recruited and paid thousands of dollars in cash, where Ventura was expected to perform, often under the influence of drugs, she says, that Diddy provided. And it didn't just happen once or a few times. She said these events were routine, nearly weekly, over a span of years. These freak-offs, as she described them, were not spur-of-the-moment hookups. They were scheduled, planned productions. Think less spontaneous sex party and more like a reoccurring film shoot with a deeply disturbing script. Diddy, according to Ventura, was the director. He picked the location, curated the lighting. Yes, he apparently had a thing for red lights and even dictated how bodies should look, glistening, she recalled, covered in baby oil, sometimes wax, and always with a kind of performative intensity that made it clear who was calling the shots and who was expected to follow them. These events took place in hotels, in private homes, in different cities, New York, LA, Miami. There was one hotel, she testified, that billed extra for damages, candle wax, oil, bodily fluids, you name it. The room had to be redecorated or maybe hazmat cleaned afterwards. That's how over the top it got. And the people involved, often male sex workers, often referred to by alias names like Daniel, Jules, the Punisher. Because sure, why not make it sound like a video game while you're at it? They weren't random pickups either. Cassie said she would be given a task of contacting these men, or they'd be sourced through escort services or even Craigslist. A binder of photos was entered into evidence, dozens of faces, all lined up, snapshots of men allegedly paid to participate. The structure of it all is what stands out. Cassie told the court that these weren't just sexual encounters. They were episodes with roles, props, and blocking. Diddy would direct where she should be, what angle, what lighting, the whole thing had the same energy as an overfunded underground theater performance. Except this wasn't theater. This was no audience. It was just Diddy, watching, sometimes recording, always orchestrating. She said drugs were part of the deal every time, MDMA, cocaine, sometimes both, and not because she wanted to party, because she didn't want to feel. Because being high was the only way to go through something like that and not fall apart in the middle of it. That's how she explained it. She needed a buffer between her and what was happening. Between her and the people she was told to sleep with. Between her and the man who called all the shots. Now, the defense has tried to argue that this was all consensual, that Cassie was a willing participant in an unconventional lifestyle. But the prosecution brought in more than just her voice to make their case. Daniel Phillip, one of the male escorts allegedly involved, testified the day before. He said Cassie paid him, but that she didn't seem eager or even present during their encounter. When asked if she was in full control of what happened, he didn't try to play defense lawyer. He simply said, "I cannot say that." He also recalled an instance where Diddy allegedly got angry, hurled a bottle, then dragged Cassie by the hair into another room. That testimony was followed by something even harder to dispute. The jury watched surveillance video from 2016. No audio, just grainy footage from a hotel security camera. But the images were clear. Diddy grabbing Cassie, throwing her to the floor, kicking her, dragging her by the hoodie. This is the footage you've all seen. A security guard at the hotel later told the court that Diddy offered him a stack of cash afterwards. "Don't tell nobody," he allegedly said. The bribe was declined. After all this, Cassie detailed the timeline, the physical evidence, the corroborating witnesses. It paints a picture not of chaos, but of control, of repetition, and routine. And it's not just what happened during those freak-offs that matters. It's what happened around them. The silencing, the planning, the lack of choice. Cassie described these events as her job. That word stuck with a lot of people in the courtroom. Not because she was paid for it, but because surviving it, preparing for it, and recovering from it was all she had energy for. She recorded 9 albums during this time. None of them were ever released. She said her career was on pause, her identity muted, her life was a cycle. Be available, be compliant, try not to upset him, then try to recover from what just happened. And while all of this is being laid out in court, Diddy sits at the defense table, scribbling notes, watching the woman he once called his partner describe something prosecutors argue was more akin to a criminal enterprise than a relationship. He hasn't said a word, but his legal team has signaled where they're headed. They've admitted he could be a jerk, that he might have had violent outbursts. But their angle is that this isn't trafficking. It's a consensual kink spun into a crime. The problem with that argument is that the more details Cassie shares, the harder it becomes to write off all of this as adult choices made between equals. The drugs, the scripts, the beatings, the surveillance footage, the hush money offers, they don't fit neatly into any narrative of two people experimenting with power dynamics. And now that's the structure that's been laid out, the blueprint for how these alleged freak-offs worked, who was involved, what they entailed. The story's shifting because this wasn't just about sex or even about violence. It was about domination, about control. So what does it look like when control stops being about where you go and starts becoming who you are? That's where we are heading next. When Cassie Ventura took the stand in the federal courtroom, she wasn't just recounting a timeline of events. She was pulling back the curtain on something much deeper, something far more insidious than what could be captured in hotel receipts, escort lists, or surveillance footage. In the first chapter of her testimony, revealed the machinery of what the prosecution is calling a criminal enterprise. This next part showed us what it felt like to live inside that machine, and why it wasn't about sex, and why it was about control, layered, constant, and inescapable. She met Sean Combs when she was 19, barely out of high school. She was fresh, off signing a deal with his label. He was the icon, the mogul, the gatekeeper. What began as mentorship turned into something more personal. But it wasn't sudden. It crept in, she said. He didn't snatch control all at once. He built it gradually, quietly, the way someone might dim the lights in a room. So slowly you don't notice until you're sitting in the dark. That, my friends, is called grooming. By her early 20s, he was calling the shots on everything. Her hair, her clothes, her collaborators, her movements, even her tone in interviews. She said it went as far as controlling who she could speak to, what she was allowed to work on, how she should carry herself in public, and according to her, it wasn't framed like an order. It was dressed up as guidance, advice, protection. But the effect was the same, isolation. He reportedly surrounded her with his own people, staff who reported back to him. If she didn't answer her phone, they'd find her. If she tried to leave without saying where she was going, she'd hear about it later. It wasn't a relationship, it was surveillance with hugs. And once that surveillance was in place, the abuse escalated. She didn't flinch when describing it. She was methodical. She told the jury about being shoved, hit, dragged, kicked, about being stomped on, about being left with bruises, about the fights that started as shouting matches and ending with her on the floor. This wasn't a single moment of rage. This was a pattern. And she didn't say it with melodrama. She said it with a steady tone of someone who had to normalize it for years just to survive. That's what made it hit harder. There was no flourish, no dynamic, no crescendo. Just blunt truth. A catalog of moments where her body was no longer her own. But she wasn't just physically trapped, she was psychologically cornered. She told the jury that what kept her in line wasn't just fear of being hurt again, though that was part of it. It was what she described as a constant low-grade anxiety that never left her. That if she said the wrong thing, wore the wrong thing, missed a call, showed disapproval, it would trigger something. And when that happened, the consequences weren't always physical. Sometimes they were digital. She testified that Combs would record her during the sex session, that those tapes, those files, explicit, degrading, private, could be used against her. She lived under that cloud. He didn't need to say it out loud every time. She knew the leverage was there. The kind of control isn't always about chains. Sometimes it's about silence. Those secrets about knowing that someone holds a version of you you'd never want the world to see. But here's where it got even more complicated. In one of the rawest moments of the day, when asked whether she ever wanted to take part in freak-offs, she didn't go straight to denial. She didn't shout no. She didn't even answer at first. She broke. She cried. Then she said that the only thing she valued from those sessions was the attention she got afterward. That moment said more than any headline could. Because it peeled back another layer, emotional dependence, a kind of trauma bonding, the cycle where the abuser becomes the only source of validation after the abuse. Where the same person who hurts you is also the one who holds you when you cry. And so you stay. Not because you don't know what's happening, but because leaving feels like tearing yourself away from the only emotional anchor you've been allowed to have. Cassie talked about losing herself, about how during all those years of performing, recording, creating, none of it saw daylight. She said she recorded 9 full albums while she was with Combs, 9, and not one of them was released. She called it a pause in her career, but what it really sounded like was erasure, a slow erasing of identity, of momentum, of purpose. Because the goal wasn't just to keep her physically available. It was to keep her emotionally dependent. Her days, she said, became centered around preparing for those sessions, enduring them, and recovering from them. That was her routine. That was her reality. Anything else, music, growth, freedom, took a backseat to just making it through. All for Diddy. And still she stayed. For years, That's a point the defense may hammer in their cross, but Ventura addressed that without being prompted. She said she didn't want to make him angry, that she was scared, that walking away didn't feel like a real option. The message was clear. It wasn't just about staying. It was about surviving. And now there she is, sitting in front of a jury, visibly pregnant, with her voice shaking but steady, finally saying everything out loud. She wasn't behind a screen. She didn't ask for anonymity. She showed up. Full name, full belly, full weight of her story. And in that courtroom, she reclaimed what so much of her 20s had taken from her own narrative. There's something about the visual that struck with everyone in that room. A woman nearing the end of one life, about to give birth to another, looking directly at the man she says spent years stripping her of choice, of freedom, of peace. That's not just testimony. That's reclamation. Not a stunt, not a PR move, just a statement of fact. This happened, and I'm done holding it alone. By the time court recessed, no one needed to judge, or no one needed the judge to explain the significance. Her words were clear. Her tears were clear. Her presence was clear. She didn't have to prove how she felt to be under that kind of control. She showed them. And as the jury filed up, probably still absorbing everything they just heard, Cassie Ventura sat there, no longer part of the narrative that was controlled for her, but the one she was finally telling herself and the world. That's where it ended for today, not with closure, not with a verdict, just the echo of a voice that had been silenced for too long, and now finally being heard. There's a lot to come in this case. We're only on day number 2, and it is already extremely raw and extremely real. A woman out there telling her truth, telling the truth, telling what an egotistical, maniacal madman put her through to stroke his own ego, to stroke his own insecurities, to stroke his evil. And that's just one person. So we've seen what Sean is capable of with people he supposedly cares about. What about those he doesn't? What about those who are just acquaintances or people who are there simply to pleasure him? How does he treat those folks? That's going to be some very interesting testimony in the coming days and weeks in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Let me know what you think of day 2 of testimony. Every day we're going to be here bringing you a recap of what went on in court. So if you want the recap, be sure to press subscribe so you don't miss it. We'll give you a quick rundown of the full day's events, everything that happened in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs. So hit that subscribe button right now, whether it's on the podcast platforms, whether it's on Twitter, whether it is on YouTube. Be sure to check out all of our spaces so you don't miss any of it. Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi is what to search on YouTube and also on the podcast platforms. At Tony B Pod is where you can find me on Twitter or X to follow along. We're also, of course, on Instagram, Facebook, and pretty much everything else. Just find us and you'll get the content. Let me know what you think in the comment section. There's so much more to come here. And it's getting dark already. My name is Tony Bruschi. We'll talk again real soon.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed. Only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.